Hi, movie fans. With Halloween just around the corner, I thought I would compile a list of what I think are the scariest movies of all time. There are so many decent horror movies out there, so making the list wasn't easy. But as an avid fan of all things horror, I have put this list together especially for you guys. Here is my top 5 list of absolutely the very best movies to watch on Halloween night. Spoiler alert. Yes, I may spill the beans on what goes down in some of these movies with my version of a recap, but at least you get the general idea of what they're about. Any one of these movies is worth watching, especially on the night of Halloween. Hope you enjoy and make sure you stay until the end and see what comes in at number 1. It is without a doubt one of the scariest movies ever made in my opinion. Coming in at number 5, we have the brilliant box office hit made in 2017 called It. Now, here is a brief recap. In October 1988, 12-year-old Bill Denber crafts a paper sailboat for Georgie, his 6-year-old brother. Georgie sails the boat along the rainy streets of small-town Derry, only to have it fall down a storm drain. As he attempts to retrieve it, Georgie sees a clown in the drain who introduces himself as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Pennywise entices Georgie to come closer, then bites his arm off and drags him into the sewer. The following summer, Bill and his friends Richie Tozier, Eddie Kasprack, and Stan Uris run afoul of older bullies Henry Bowers, Belch Huggins, Patrick Extetter, and Victor Criss. Bill, still haunted by Georgie's disappearance, calculates that his brother's body may have washed up in a marshy wasteland called the Barrens. He recruits his friends to investigate, believing Georgie may still be alive. Ben Hanscom, one of Bill's new classmates, learns that unexplained tragedies and child disappearances have plagued the town for centuries. Targeted by Bauer's gang, Ben flees into the Barrens and meets Bill's group. They find the sneaker of a missing girl named Betty Ripsum, while Patrick is killed by Pennywise while searching the sewers for Ben. Beverly Marsh, a girl bullied over her rumored promiscuity, also joins the group. Both Bill and Ben develop feelings for her. Later, the group of friends orphan Mike Hanlon after rescuing him from Bowers. Each member of the group has encountered terrifying manifestations of the same menacing clown who attacked Georgie. A headless undead boy, for Ben. A sink that spews blood only children can see, for Beverly. A diseased and rotting leper, for Eddie. A disturbing painting coming alive, for Stan, Mike's parents burning alive, for Mike. And a frightening phantom of Georgie, for Bill. Now calling themselves the Losers Club, they realize they are all being stalked by the same entity, which they refer to as It. They determine that it appears as their individual worst fears, awakening every 27 years to feed on the children of Derry before resuming hibernation, and moves about by using the sewer lines, which all lead to an old stone well hidden under an abandoned house on Neibolt Street. After Pennywise attacks them, the group ventures to the house to confront it, only to be separated and terrorized. As Pennywise gloats to Bill about Georgie, the losers regroup and Beverly impales Pennywise through the head, forcing the clown to retreat. The group flees the house and begins to splinter, with only Bill and Beverly resolute in fighting it. Weeks later, after Beverly confronts and incapacitates her sexually abusive father, Pennywise abducts her. The Losers Club reassembles and returns to the abandoned house to rescue her. Bowers, who has murdered his abusive father after being driven insane by it, attacks the group. Mike fights back and pushes Bowers down the well, apparently killing him. The losers descend into the sewers and find its underground lair, which contains a mountain of decayed circus props and children's belongings around which the bodies of its child victims float in midair. Beverly, now catatonic after being exposed to bright lights inside its gaping mouth, is restored to consciousness when Ben kisses her. Bill encounters Georgie but recognizes that he is it in disguise. As Pennywise, it takes Bill hostage, offering to spare the others and go into hibernation if they let it feed on Bill. The losers reject this, battling with it while overcoming their various fears. It is eventually defeated and retreats deeper into the sewers, with Bill declaring that it will starve during its hibernation. After finding the remnants of Georgie's raincoat, Bill finally comes to terms with his brother's death, with his friends comforting him. As summer ends, Beverly informs the group of a vision she had while catatonic, where she saw them fighting it again as adults. The losers swear a blood oath that they will return to Derry as adults if it returns. After the others make their goodbyes and disperse, Beverly and Bill discuss her leaving the next day to live with her aunt in Portland. Before she leaves, Bill reveals his feelings and they kiss. The end. Coming in next in the 4th spot, we have the original 1987 classic horror movie called Halloween. The movie that gave birth to many sequels and made the Michael Myers mask a go-to-Halloween accessory is an absolute must-watch movie on Halloween. Here is the recap. On Halloween night 1963, in the fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois, 6-year-old Michael Myers inexplicably stabs his teenage sister Judith to death with a kitchen knife. For the next 15 years, he is incarcerated at Smith's Grove Sanitarium. On October 30, 1978, Michael's psychiatrist, Dr. Samuel Loomis, and his colleague Marion Chambers arrive at the sanitarium to escort Michael to court for a hearing. Loomis hopes the outcome of the hearing is that Michael will never be released from Smith's Grove. However, Michael steals their car and escapes Smith's Grove, killing a mechanic for his coveralls on the way back to Haddonfield. Upon returning home, Michael steals a white and expressionless mask from a hardware store. On Halloween, he sees high school student Laurie Strode drop off a key at the long-abandoned Myers house that her father is trying to sell. Laurie notices Michael stalking her throughout the day, but her friends Annie Brackett and Linda Vanderklok dismiss her concerns. Loomis arrives in Haddonfield in search of Michael and finds Judith's tombstone missing from the local cemetery. He meets with Annie's father, Sheriff Lee Brackett, and they investigate Michael's house, where Loomis tells Brackett that Michael is pure evil. Brackett is doubtful of the danger but goes to patrol the streets, while Loomis waits at the house, expecting Michael to return. That night, Laurie babysits Tommy Doyle, while Annie babysits Lindsay Wallace across the street. Michael follows them, spying on Annie and killing the Wallace's dog. Tommy sees Michael from the windows and thinks he is the boogeyman, but Laurie does not believe him. Annie later takes Lindsay over to the Doyle house to spend the night so she can pick up her boyfriend Paul. When she gets into her car, Michael appears from the back seat, strangling her and slitting her throat. Soon after, Linda and her boyfriend Bob Sims arrive at the Wallace house and find it empty. After having sex, Bob goes downstairs to get a beer, where Michael pins him to the wall with a kitchen knife. Michael then poses as Bob in a ghost costume and confronts Linda, who teases him to no effect. Unawed, she calls Laurie to find out what happened to Annie. Michael proceeds to strangle Linda with the foam cord while Laurie listens on the other end, thinking it is a joke. Meanwhile, Loomis discovers the stolen car and begins searching the streets. Suspicious of the phone call, Laurie goes to the Wallace house across the street and finds her friends' bodies, as well as Judith's headstone, in the upstairs bedroom. She flees to the hallway in terror, where Michael suddenly appears in the dark and slashes her arm, causing her to fall over the stairway banister. Injured, she narrowly escapes and runs back to the Doyle house, but loses the keys to the front door when she falls on the staircase. Tommy lets her in, then she orders him and Lindsay to hide, only to find the phone is dead. Michael sneaks in through the window and attacks her again, but she incapacitates him by stabbing him in the neck with a knitting needle. Thinking he's dead, Laurie staggers upstairs to check on the kids, but is shocked to see Michael alive. She tells the kids to hide in the bathroom while Laurie hides in the bedroom closet, but Michael finds her and breaks in. So she stabs him in the eye with a coat hanger and in the chest with his own knife. She then tells Tommy and Lindsay to go down the street to a neighbor's house to call the police. After they leave, Michael awakens once again and slowly approaches an unsuspecting Laurie. Loomis sees the kids running from the house and goes to investigate, finding Michael and Laurie fighting upstairs. Laurie rips Michael's mask off, making him hesitate to put it back on. Loomis shoots Michael 6 times, knocking him off the balcony. Laurie asks Loomis if Michael was the boogeyman, which Loomis confirms. Loomis walks to the balcony and looks down to see that Michael has vanished. Unsurprised, he stares off into the night as Laurie begins to sob. Michael's breathing is heard during a montage of locations where he had recently been, indicating he could be anywhere. The end. Grabbing the third spot is The Conjuring 2. I have to say that for me, this is one seriously scary movie, as it has a sense of realism about it that many other horror movies lack. In 1976, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren investigate the Amityville murders at the Amityville house to determine if a demonic presence was truly responsible for Ronald DeFeo Jr. killing his entire family on November 13, 1974, and the subsequent haunting incident involving the Lutz family. During a seance, Lorraine is drawn into a vision where she relives the murders and encounters a demonic nun figure. She then witnesses Ed being impaled, badly frightening her. In 1977, the Hodgson family begins to experience strange occurrences in their home in the London borough of Enfield after Janet, the second oldest of 4 children, plays with a Ouija board. Janet starts to sleepwalk and converses in her dreams with an entity in the form of an angry elderly man who sits in the family's armchair, insisting the house is his. Eventually, the Hodgson siblings and their mother Peggy witness paranormal events, terrifying them into seeking refuge with their neighbors. When the media attempts to interview the family, Janet is possessed by the elderly man, Bill Wilkins, who previously lived and died in the house. As Janet shows more signs of demonic possession, the story eventually reaches the Warrens, and their assistance is requested to prove whether or not Janet's possession is a hoax. Lorraine, fearful that her vision of Ed's death may become reality, warns him not to get involved. She has another vision of the demonic nun in Ed's study. The demon says its name, which Lorraine scratches into her Bible in a trance. The demon's name can actually be seen in Ed's study, spelled out in letters on the bookshelf. While staying at the Hodgson residence, Ed and Lorraine consult other paranormal investigators, including Morris Gross and Anita Gregory, on the legitimacy of the case. Gregory presents video evidence of Janet wrecking the kitchen on purpose, thereby discrediting the haunting. Based on this, Ed and Lorraine decide to leave, believing the family is lying for fame. However, they discover that the spirit of Wilkins is only a pawn being manipulated by the true demon, the powerful nun who is seeking to break Janet's will. Lorraine realizes that her abilities have been blocked by the nun, preventing her from grasping the truth of Janet's possession. Ed and Lorraine quickly return to the Hodgson residence and find Janet possessed and the rest of the Hodgsons locked outside the house. Ed ventures inside alone and finds Janet at the window, ready to commit suicide. He manages to grab Janet in time, but is close to falling. Lightning strikes the tree in the yard, turning it into the stump that impales Ed and Lorraine's vision. Lorraine finds her Bible in which she wrote the demon's name, Valak. She addresses the demon by its name, successfully condemning it back to hell. Janet is freed of its possession, and Lorraine pulls her and Ed to safety. After returning home, Ed adds an item to his and Lorraine's collection, a haunted Crooked Man Zoetrope toy owned by Peggy's youngest child, placing it beside April's music box and the Annabelle doll. The end. In position number 2, we have the 2002 supernatural horror called The Ring. Starring Naomi Watts, this movie is a remake of the 1998 Japanese horror movie called Ring. Watts portrays a journalist who investigates a cursed videotape that seemingly kills the viewer 7 days after watching it. All I can say is that this is one movie you don't want to watch on your own. At a suburban home in Seattle, Washington, two friends, Katie Embry and Becca Kotler, discuss their town's resident legend of a cursed videotape in Katie's room. Whoever watches it dies 7 days later. Katie claims she watched the tape a week ago with her boyfriend Josh and 2 other friends. Minutes later, she is killed by an unseen force. At Katie's funeral, her Aunt Rachel Keller speaks to Katie's mother, Murphy, about her death, and both are clueless as to why she died so suddenly. Thus, Rachel begins to investigate her death. Rachel lives with her young son, Aiden. Rachel learns that Katie's friends Josh Durandot, Stacy Miller, and Scott Conderoy, who also viewed the tape, all died on the same night as Katie, all with disfigured appearances, and all at the same time of 10 p.m. Rachel travels to Shelter Mountain Inn where the 4 stayed, discovering the cursed videotape. In the cabin where the 4 stayed, Cabin 12, Rachel watches the tape, which contains monotone, disturbing imagery. Once the tape ends, Rachel receives a phone call from an unknown caller who whispers 7 days. Rachel recruits Noah Clay, her ex-boyfriend and Aiden's father, to study the tape, making a copy after he watches the original. Rachel begins to experience supernatural phenomena as the week passes, haunted by a young girl with soaking wet long black hair. Investigation into the tape's imagery leads Rachel to Anna Morgan, a horse breeder from Moscow Island, who committed suicide after her prize-winning horses drowned themselves. After a strange nightmare, she awakens to having a hand-shaped burn mark on her left arm. Once out of bed, Rachel finds Aiden has seen the tape and discovers that Noah is also experiencing supernatural occurrences. Rachel travels to Moscow Island to speak to Anna's widower, Richard. On the ferry journey, a horse leaps to its death after it became spooked by Rachel's cursed presence as she attempts to pet it, recreating imagery from the cursed tape. Noah goes to Eola County Psychiatric Hospital to view Anna's medical files. Both separately discover Anna had an adopted daughter, Samara, who is able to psychically etch mental images onto surfaces and into people's and animals' minds. Rachel tries to speak with Richard about Samara, but he denies her existence. Rachel speaks with Dr. Grasnick, the island's general practitioner, who explains Samara was adopted due to Anna's infertility, recommending them to admit her to Eola, assuming Samara is still there. Rachel sneaks into the Morgan farmhouse, watching a videotape of Samara in a psychotherapy session. In said session, she claims she cannot control her abilities, has no way of knowing how, and admits that she wants to hurt her parents. Though being sorry for that, she states she wants to because they love the horses more than they love her. Sometime after the psychotherapy sessions, Samara drove every single one of the horses to suicide by etching horrific imagery into their heads. After the tape ends, Richard strikes Rachel with a horse bridle, taking the TV upstairs. Rachel follows Richard, confronting him as she walks up the stairs. She follows him into the bathroom, where he has plugged in several electronic devices to a single power source, wired them to the bridle through an electrical strip, biting down on it, and stepping into the flooded bathtub which flooded the floor. Having said he'd been severely mentally damaged by Samara and learning that Samara's powers are still at large, he electrocutes himself to death because of this. Noah arrives, calming Rachel, and the two break their way into the barn, where Samara was kept isolated. They find a burnt image of a tree under the wallpaper of her barn bedroom, which Rachel recognizes from Shelter Mountain. They return to the inn still feeling stuck at a roadblock. No, understandably frustrated, pulls the phone out of a wall, which knocks a vase with marbles to the floor. The marbles roll to a dip in the floor, which then leads them to discover rotted wood. No gets a fire axe and chops through the floor, locating a stone well hidden under the floorboards, the final image on the tape. Rachel falls in the well after the floor partially collapses, experiencing a vision of Anna suffocating Samara and throwing her down the well where she died 7 days later, her last sight being the ring of daylight around the well's cap. Samara's corpse surfaces after No tells Rachel that the 7-day deadline has passed. The authorities assure the pair that Samara's corpse will be properly buried. The next day, Rachel tells Aiden that the curse has been lifted by liberating Samara. A distressed Aiden tells Rachel that it was a mistake to help Samara, saying that she never sleeps. At its apartment, Nov is killed by the vengeful ghost of Samara. Rachel, upon finding his disfigured corpse, returns home and destroys the original tape, wondering why Nov was killed, but she was not. She realizes that unlike Nov, she made a copy of the tape, which Aiden watched. As Rachel assists Aiden in making a copy of the cursed tape, Aiden asks what will happen to the person who watches the new tape, but Rachel does not answer. The end. Okay, now for the big one, the top of the list. The scariest movie to watch on Halloween. The movie is the classic 1973 supernatural horror film called The Exorcist. You may not agree that The Exorcist is the scariest movie ever, but it probably also isn't much of a surprise to see it at the top of my list. Its dramatic pacing and somewhat dated effects may seem quaint compared to some contemporary horror, but there's no denying the power the film continues to have over those who see it for the first time. Now enjoy this recap. Lancaster Marin, a veteran Catholic priest, is on an archaeological dig in the ancient city of Hatrat in Iraq. Alerted by a colleague, he finds a sculpture that resembles Pazuzu, a demon of ancient origins with whose history Marin is familiar. Soon afterwards, after consuming a small white pill, Marin encounters a statue towering over him in the image of Pazuzu, an omen warning him of a looming confrontation. Meanwhile, in Georgetown, actress Chris MacNeil is living on location with her 12-year-old daughter Regan. She is starring in a film directed by her friend and associate Burke Dennings. During this time, small oddities begin to occur around the house, such as scratching from the attic without a source. After playing with a Ouija board and contacting a supposedly imaginary friend whom she calls Captain Howdy, Regan begins acting strangely, using obscene language and exhibiting abnormal strength. Additionally, there is poltergeist-like activity in the home at night. Chris hosts a party during which Regan comes downstairs unannounced, tells one of the guests, an astronaut, that he will die up there, and then urinates on the floor. Later that night, Regan's bed begins to shake and levitate violently. Chris consults a number of physicians, putting Regan through a battery of diagnostic tests, but the doctors find nothing physiologically wrong with her. One night when Chris is out, Burke Dennings is babysitting a heavily sedated Regan. Chris returns to hear that Dennings has died, having fallen out of the window. Although this is assumed to have been an accident given Burke's history of heavy drinking, his death is investigated by Lieutenant William Kinderman. Kinderman interviews Chris. He also consults psychiatrist Father Damien Carras, a Jesuit priest struggling with his faith. Carras' crisis of faith is precipitated by the death of his mother, which he blames on himself. The doctors, believing that Regan's aberrations are mostly psychological in origin, recommend an exorcism be performed. Chris arranges a meeting with Carras, who, reluctant to engage spiritually, agrees to at least speak with Regan. As the two come face to face, Carras and Regan test each other's wits, although Carras is skeptical of the idea that anything supernatural is happening. Chris tearfully finds herself at a dead end and confides in Carras that Regan was the one who murdered Dennings and begs him to find a solution. Over the next couple of days, Carras witnesses Regan speaking backward in different languages she does not know, and the phrase "help me" appears to be carved from the inside of her stomach, convincing him she really is possessed by a demon. He implores the church to let him perform an exorcism, but feeling Carras is outmatched, the church calls on Marin to perform the exorcism while allowing Carras to assist. The ritual begins as a battle of wills, with Regan performing a series of horrific and vulgar acts. They attempt to exorcise the demon, but the spirit digs in, claiming to be the devil himself. The spirit relentlessly toys with the priest and zeroes in on Carras, sensing his guilt from the passing of his mother. Carras weakens after the demon impersonates his late mother and is excused by Marin, who continues the exorcism alone. Once he has gathered his strength, Carras re-enters the room and discovers Marin dead of a heart attack. After he fails to revive Marin, the enraged Carras grabs a laughing Regan and wrestles her to the ground. At Carras' invitation, the demon leaves Regan's body and takes hold of Carras. In a final moment of strength and self-sacrifice, Karras throws himself out the window before he can harm Regan, falling to his death down a set of stone steps and defeating the demon at last. Father Dyer, a friend of Karras, happens upon the scene and administers the last rites to Karras. A few days later, Regan, now back to her normal self, prepares to leave for Los Angeles with her mother. Although Regan has no apparent recollection of her possession, she is moved by the sight of Dyer's clerical collar to kiss him on the cheek. As the car pulls away, Chris tells the driver to stop, and she gives Father Dyer a medallion that belonged to Karras. After they drive off, Dyer pauses at the top of the stone steps to give Regan's window one last look and then turns to walk away. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to comment below and don't forget to share some love by smashing the like button. See you soon.